Hey, continue our coverage here at the Baseball Winter Meetings at Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas. Steve Melewski with ESPN's Keith Law. We get to chat with Keith every year at the Winter Meetings. We greatly appreciate you making time, much in demand.
Sure
So
thing.
thank you for coming over here.
You asked early. That was good. You got on the list.
We got to your entourage. We got you over here. Thank you for doing that. So, Keith, things are very different 1 year later since the last time we visited at the Winter Meetings in Baltimore. Mike Elias, Executive Vice President, General Manager, Sig Mejdal is in there to get an analytics department up and running. What are your thoughts on those two?
I thought it was great. I thought this is exactly what they needed. Each individually, I think, is exactly what they need. And obviously the team, the fact that these guys have worked together for a while now and had so much success in Houston also points to this being a great hire. And in particular, I feel like the hiring of Mike Elias, he's not taking this job unless he knows that he has the authority that Dan Duquette did not have. I think Dan's track record there was somewhat mixed, but you have to remember he tried to GM essentially with one hand tied behind his back much of the time. Mike comes in, he gets to pick his own manager, his own amateur director, his own farm director, on down the line. This will be Mike Elias's organization in philosophy and in practice from day one.
Is he ready for this?
I think so. I think he's been ready for this for a little while now. I think he was somewhat in demand previously, but recognized there were certain opportunities he wanted. The fact that he could come with Sig, who I also know very well. Sig was very helpful to me when I was working on my book. So I know a lot about Sig the person and Sig the baseball mind also. I have a ton of respect for him. The fact that Elias could bring him as well into an organization where they could build something from scratch. Baltimore had one of the smallest R&D departments in all of baseball and lost two of their people in the last 12 months from that department. So now they get to come in and build something really from the foundation on up, which I know is very appealing to two people as intellectually minded as those two are.
It's interesting when it comes to analytics, it seems like the Orioles will go from, I mean, let's just be honest here, the dark ages, for whatever reason, analytics did not reach that clubhouse. And that's not going to be the case anymore, obviously. Can the Orioles both get up to speed with that to be even with everybody and then try to stay ahead? Because isn't that the real key? Can you outdo the other teams in things you're doing?
Yes, but it's going to take time. And my guess from talking to GMs of other clubs who've encountered the same situations, you're probably looking at 2 to 3 years until they reach a point where they're on par with other clubs that have been doing this for longer, obviously. Some clubs have had large R&D departments for up to 10 years now. We are sort of in a larger era now with the StatCast data, where the technical requirements in terms of hardware, software, and the personnel requirements, just staffing size, are much higher these last 3 years. I think it's going to take, it may take a full calendar year before they can even they can fully staff their R&D department. I've heard they have 7 current job openings. That's not even large. But to try to hire 7 people in an off-season, we're already late into an off-season, and they have all these other baseball hires to make. That's a lot to ask. It may be a year before they feel like they're actually running to the point where they can do the kind of analysis that they were comfortable with in Houston.
So very interesting. So when you talk about analytics, I mean, I think of it in 2 ways. How it impacts evaluation of acquisitions, which now goes down to the amateur level.
Yes, very much
including in trades at the major league level and so forth. And also how it impacts the major league clubhouse, how players can use the data to get hitters out that night or to get hits that night if they're a batter.
Right.
Is one more important than the other? The evaluation per the performance?
That's a really good question. I don't know if there's a clear answer, in my mind at least, because it's hard for me to say either one of them is less important. I will say that I think to the casual fan, it's probably more evident where analytics comes into play on the major league field. You see it in defensive positioning all the time. You see it now in pitchers coming out of games, especially playoff games, after just twice through the order. That's very different than what we used to have. But teams are using analytics now on the amateur side. In the draft, and that's part of why Houston was very successful in the draft, they're using it on the international front. I was at a showcase recently for Venezuelan amateur players as young as 13, where they had TrackMan-style data. It wasn't exactly the same, but they had equipment installed in this park in Aruba to try to capture some of that kind of information because the teams want it. All teams now that have R&D departments want that information, even on the 13-year-olds in Latin America. And the fact that the Orioles didn't have that information, didn't care about that information, always put them at a disadvantage in the draft, in the international market, and as you said before, and in making trades as well.
Wow, that is amazing stuff. 13-year-olds,
yes,
and having track
all taller
man
than I
and,
am, by the way.
Well,
yes.
I mean, they're in Venezuela at 13. Some of these kids are probably 6'4". I don't know, but
there were some 6-footers there. It was yes, and some of them were very, very talented.
And a lot of talented. It's amazing what's going on, and so. Is that really the battle now in analytics, as we touched on before, to outdo the other guy? Because most of these teams now have the basics and beyond, and it's probably some unbelievable stuff that the average fan would be blown away by, I'm sure, and the average writer would be blown away by. But now we got to outdo the other guy, so we keep an advantage.
So you want your analytics department, you're always looking for new information, advantages, temporary inefficiencies that you can hopefully exploit, whether it's in the draft or on the major league level or in pro scouting, to find players that other teams maybe have somewhat undervalued. But also, you need your analytics department to keep up with 29 other teams you're competing with on the field and in the market for players. How can you compete against other this would be true in any business, right? You need competitive intelligence. You need to be able to understand why other teams are doing the things they're doing. Why did they take that player in the third round? Your analytics department should be giving you that information. The Orioles, it'll take 2 years to get to that point, but they will get there.
Wow, fascinating stuff. So you mentioned Sig Mejdal, and you touched on him in your book, Smart Baseball, and you know Sid. So give us a little insight here. What makes him tick? What makes him good?
A literal rocket scientist. I'm sure that you've probably used that joke or heard that joke before, but he actually is one, as it turns out. Extremely bright, extremely intellectually curious, too. Not just someone who's smart, but someone who enjoys asking questions and the process of finding ways to answer those questions. That's how you advance a club forward. That's how you find new philosophies, new ideas, and find those inefficiencies that you can try to exploit, whether it's in the amateur draft, the international market, the pro market. He will infuse a philosophy throughout the organization. And he's very comfortable working with traditional baseball people, too. He was in uniform one summer as a coach. Right. He loves to go out to the backfields to talk specifically to coaches. He really pioneered the idea of this data is not just for finding players, but it's for improving players. We need to get our entire player development machine on board with what's coming out of analytics so that we can get the most out of the players we have, either to get them to the majors or to increase their trade value.
I mean, putting him in uniform was a tremendous idea, in my opinion, by the Astros. For him to see how that gets to the clubhouse for an 18-year-old kid. We're not talking about a 28-year-old, 6-year Major League veteran. This has to reach kids in the New York Penn League, and he was in the New York Penn League. So he knows, I mean, that has to give him such a base to really help him going forward.
Yes, and understanding what you just said, it's the idea of how does this information get to the kids? How do the kids respond to that information? So what is the coach's role? Understanding what coaches have to do to be able to communicate this information to kids who may not have much of a technical background or much of a mathematical background, many of whom have never received much coaching at all, let alone the kind of analytically minded coaching that we're talking about. When I worked for the Blue Jays, my mentor there, Tony LaCava, always cautioned me on evaluating defensive players as they were coming out of the draft. Remember, these kids have probably not received much coaching on fielding at all. Well, it's also probably true that a lot of them haven't received much coaching on the angle of their swings or the spin rates on various pitches. So you're getting them into the system. Now, for the first time in their lives, they're away from home, they're playing every day, and they're getting information of a sort they've never seen before. That is a huge personal challenge, a management challenge, not so much an analytical challenge.
So give it to the Oriole fans straight. Next couple years, what do you think they're in for in Baltimore? And you don't have to sugarcoat it if it's going to be rough. And I think fans, and tell me if you agree with this, in 2019 especially, if you're an Oriole fan, you have to look at a baseball game differently. If you lose that game, but a 21-year-old pitcher pitched 6 strong innings, a young hitter made some nice plays, run down some balls in the gap, you have to look at things that one day will result in a win.
Yes, I would agree with all of that. And having been with a club when I was with the Blue Jays too, we were often bringing young players up, and you want to win every game you can, obviously, but recognize the Orioles are going to lose 100 games this year. They're probably going to lose 100 games the year after that. But are the players they're bringing up from within the system or bringing in from outside, if they continue to make trades, acquire players in the draft, they're going to be aggressive on waivers. They're probably going to take someone in the Rule 5 draft. they're in a point now where Houston was in 2011, 2012 actually, where they could just try stuff, see what happens, which to me I think is fun. I mean, as somebody who I think I'm pretty curious myself, that's fun. I mean, if I'm an Orioles fan, view this as an experiment. We don't know how everything's going to work, but it should be really fun to find out what does work and what doesn't work. Well, we learned something from this. We're going to go differently. You're going to get to follow along with this intellectual journey with a front office, but also have the confidence, too, that these guys have been there before. They've built success. They know where they're going. They're not just throwing stuff against the wall. There's an idea behind it. You get to watch the results play out in front of you.
And if it does end up at the top of the mountain as it did for Houston, there must be such great reward not only for the people who put it together, but the people who support it along the way.
Yes, Mike Elias will never pay for a crab cake again in Baltimore if he does that.
He's very popular today.
Yes.
And hopefully 5 years from now when we're sitting here, he'll be as such. But Keith, always enjoy your insights. Great stuff. Your work on ESPN, your book, and everything else you got going on. Thanks for taking time today.
My pleasure.
ESPN's Keith Law visiting with us here at the winter meetings on MASN All Access.